I'm getting ready to replace the crankset on my son's Diamondback hook. In this case, the bike came with a sealed bottom bracket tapered square crankset. So to remove this one, I'm going to need some tools that I'm going to show here in a sec, but basically a crank puller and something to remove the crank. If you're removing like an older type of crankset, it might have a 15mm bolt in here instead of a hex bolt. And instead of a sealed bracket, some of the less expensive bikes, I know my Schwinn Taft did not have a sealed bottom bracket, instead had a caged bearing bottom bracket. And in that case, you basically remove the lock nut with a spanner wrench and then remove the cone. It's very similar procedure. So for this setup, I'm going to need a crank puller. I have two different ones. I'm going to show the difference in a sec. I'm going to need an 8mm Allen wrench. I'm going to need the tool to remove the bottom bracket, a bottom bracket wrench. And I'm going to need a 15mm socket if I use this one. You need to use a socket with this one. This one's integrated. So one thing I really wanted to show is, because it comes up on a lot of the videos I make anytime I deal with a crankset, and this can get a little confusing. In this case, we're removing a tapered square crankset. The reason I like this particular crank extractor is because this one's a Parks one. I'll put the link in the description. But the reason I like this one is because it's universal. You can remove tapered square cranksets, and you can also remove like Holotech type cranksets, which are the modern type ones that most modern bikes will have, especially the ones with one-by systems. But those have a big axle. They have, I believe it's a 24mm axle. So you need this to push on the axle. The tapered square has a much smaller axle, and if you use this will get caught up on the edges of the crankset, the crank arm itself, and you're going to push on the crank arm edge instead of the axle. And what that's going to do is these threads are going to rip the threads right out of your crank arm. So like I said, the reason I like this one is because it's universal. So in this case, I need to use this so it can go inside the hole where the bolt goes to the axle from the crank arm, and it'll bypass the crank arm and push on the axle itself. So on this one, what I do is I pop this out, pop the other end out, and switch them. So this is the business end. I'll just put this one. So now this one's on the business end, this one's hanging out on the back. Now on this one, this is the CCP1, the Park Tool CCP1. And on this one, you don't, you screw this in and then you just turn this to extract, so you don't need the socket. One thing is that this will only fit a tapered square. You see, this is the small pusher or push rod. See that? They sell another one that's self-contained that has the wide one like this on the tip. And then that one you would use for your Holotech type cranksets. So make sure that you understand that this one you can extract a tapered square, but you cannot extract a Holotech with this one. What happens is that's going to go right inside. The axle has a hole in the center, and that's going to go right inside that hole, and it won't push it out. Now the other thing you want to understand here is that when you thread this into the crank arm, you want to make sure that you start with this all the way back in, because if you thread it like that, that's going to hit the axle. You might catch only a couple of threads, and then when you thread in the push rod part, those, and if it's tight, those threads again will strip right out of your crank arm. So you have to make sure you back off the part that's going to push on the axle so that it doesn't interfere, so it's at least flush or behind the threads. And now I can thread that completely into the crank arm as far as it'll go. One thing I realized as I was talking about the tools I need in the crank extractor is that I kind of sound low energy today, but I just came back from a 10.5 mile ride about an hour ago, and it is hot and humid and I am feeling tired. But on with the crank. So we have the 8mm hex there. So we're going to use the hex here. And of course, we're just going to remove that bolt. Now I'm going to take my extractor, and as I showed, I have it all the way pushed back, and I'm using the smaller tip, because if not, it's going to hang up on the edges of the crank arm right in there. And I want to get all those threads in there. So thread in all the way till it'll go no more. So that's a pretty decent amount. I just hand tighten this. Some people will tighten that with a wrench. I just hand tighten it. I've never had problems. So now you screw in the part that's going to push the axle here. And crank arm is out. Since I hand tighten this, it comes off very easily. Like I said, no need to tighten it with a wrench. Now I do the same for the other crank arm. So on the second arm, on the non-drive side, I'm going to go ahead and show how to use the self-contained crank extractor. Again, make sure that you have the actual centerpiece behind there. And you're just going to do the same thing. So you screw this in all the way in. Hand tight, and now you just turn this thing clockwise so that the bolt starts pushing that in, so until the crank arm comes off. This one is a little tough with like I showed with the ratchet and the longer breaker bar. It's a lot easier, but this one's out. So then you back off a little bit here and you remove the tool. So now we have to remove the actual bottom bracket. This is a sealed bottom bracket. We're going to use the Shimano sealed bottom bracket tool here. Now, one thing to be very aware of is that I'm on the drive side right now. You can see the chain here. On the drive side, this is a back threaded or a left thread cup. So you're going to actually remove it clockwise. Okay. There we go. Okay, and in this one, you can see how dirty it is. You can see there you have the specs on it. It looks like this is an aftermarket. Actually, somebody has switched this. It has big, beefy bearings, which is nice. It says RPM BB7420. It gives you, this is a 73 width. Now on the other side, it removes conventional. It's going to be counterclockwise on the non-drive side for removal. So this is what the sealed tapered square bottom bracket looks like, and it has to be specific. You have to get the specific width. In this case, it's a 73mm, and the specific axle, which I'm trying to see, I think it's a 118mm axle for this Diamondback hook. An important tip is that, I removed this one first, but when you install, you have to install the whole cartridge first. So you always have to put in this one first. This is the drive side. Then you put it in until it bottoms out, okay? So you put it all the way in. When you put the non-drive side out, it's gonna go in as much as it needs to. In other words, it's gonna go in, you tighten until it locks there and stops. So you have to put in this first, then you put in the non-drive side. So that's pretty much it. I hope you get a better understanding on how to remove or replace a bottom bracket. in this case a tapered square bottom bracket with a sealed cartridge. And so this is a BSA bottom bracket, 73 millimeter width. And just as a teaser, what I'm gonna be putting in is a SRAM NX dub in there. So I bought a 68/73 millimeter dub bottom bracket, and I'll be able to put this in. So we'll see how it goes, because I've heard that the dub chain doesn't like, or the SRAM chain, not the chain, the chain ring is only supposed to be used with a SRAM chain, but I've also read a lot of people run them fine with the Shimano chain. I checked the one that came on this bottom bracket on this crank set, and it seems to be fine. It fits fine, it engages fine. But I had to order the bottom bracket. I ordered, this is a non-boost bike, so I ordered a 6 millimeter offset chain ring. The one that came with it was 3 millimeter for boost. So once that's all here, I'll make another video on how to install it. I think it's gonna look pretty cool. So story behind this is, locally they were selling this, a guy was selling this one for $20 with the chain ring, except like I said, it was a boost chain ring, so I had to buy another one, and with a bottom bracket, but it was a press fit bottom bracket. This is a threaded, English threaded bottom bracket, so I could not use the bottom bracket. So 20 bucks, 35, put 40 bucks for the, I think it was $38 for the bottom bracket. I bought the steel chain ring at 6 millimeter, which was $15. So I got a pretty good deal on barely used NX dub cranks. So give it a thumbs up if you like the video, subscribe if you want to see some of my other videos, and as always, thank you for watching.